Might just, as people are joining, I might just kick things off. So really good evening to everyone. Great to see everyone again for another monthly environment session. We've got a great lineup tonight, lots of really fantastic speakers. So really looking forward to this evening. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognising their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Yep, so tonight we thought we'd do something a little bit different. So we're going to hear from 5 different speakers and we've allocated 10 minutes to each of them. And we just thought we'd just sort of try and cover a whole range of different topics and do them sort of short and sharp, so to speak. So I think it'll be fantastic. And we've got some really good different areas we're going to cover. So what we thought we'd do is hear from each one of the speakers and then have some time at the end just to go through some Q&A for them as well. So we'll sort of save that towards the end. So if you have, as we go, if you want to sort of add anything into the chat, please do so. Or when we come to the Q&A, just pop your hand up and we'll come to you. So in terms of no particular order tonight, but I'm going to kick off with Samantha Johnson. So just introducing Samantha. Samantha spoke to our group, I think it was last year sometime, Samantha, if I'm right. Yep. Mm-hmm. That was the time Samantha was the CEO of Polestar. She basically started that business here in Australia from scratch, which was a huge effort and very successful. And then Samantha finished there and is now the interim CEO at the Electric Vehicle Council. And what she's going to talk about tonight is a little bit about what's going on at the Electric Vehicle Council. And in particular, I know, Samantha, you did a trip recently to China and just maybe a few things, some of the stuff that you saw over there. So thanks for joining us, and over to you.
Just my pleasure. I'm just going to jump in quickly before you start, Samantha, to say we're going to be quite vocal on the time tonight. So I'm going to set the alarm. It'll beep at 10 minutes. Well, if you need to finish off at that point, that's absolutely fine. But just to let you know, for each of the speakers, when you hear the alarm, that's your 10 minutes.
All right. I won't go any further. All right. Thanks, Carolyn. All right, good evening, everyone. As Stephen alluded to, I'll take you a bit through what the Electric Vehicle Council, or EVC, does, and then I'll take you through the trip to China with BYD. So our mission at the EVC is to accelerate the electrification of road transport for a more sustainable and prosperous Australia. Our work covers policy and infrastructure advocacy and industry insights across most of the EV value chain. We provide opportunities for members to contribute to policy discussions and submissions, as well as organising regular networking opportunities for our EV community. We have approximately 100 corporate members, and the sectors include EV manufacturers and those on the EV journey, the broader energy sector, charge point operators, big banks and fleet organisations, mobility companies, and more. So to accelerate the transition to EVs, the federal government released their National Electric Vehicle Strategy in 2023. So the aim of the strategy is to increase the uptake of EVs, to reduce our emissions and improve the wellbeing of Australians. The work at the EVC is very closely aligned with and supports many objectives within the strategy. The EVC also undertakes other work that is not included in the strategy objectives that will boost EV infrastructure and uptake. So what is driving the EV transition in Australia? So we have supportive government policies at federal and state territory level, increased supply of more affordable EVs, continued investment in charging infrastructure, and a growing consumer education and awareness. So on the policy side, we've had the fringe benefits tax exemption on EVs for novated leases. This can save drivers more than $10,000 over the lifetime of their EV. And approximately 40% of EV cars purchased in Australia since mid-2023 have been via salary sacrifice or novated lease arrangements. There is also state and territory-wide rebates, incentives and road user benefits available, although they are reducing over time, mostly because of our budgets running out. A Clean Energy Finance Corporation and other green loans are available to reduce financing costs for consumers. There is energy regulatory reform and also programs on freight policy reform and heavy vehicle access policy. On the supply side, we have new vehicle efficiency standard legislation that has been introduced in Australia that puts Australia on the level playing field of other countries for the supply of lower emission vehicles. Vehicle manufacturers will soon be penalised if their CO2 levels are above the efficiency standard guidelines. 2 years ago, I was advocating for the need for fuel efficiency standards, so it's good to be here now as part of a team that are actually supporting its implementation. There is now a greater supply of more affordable Chinese-made EVs in the market, and more on the way in coming years. There's more than 40 new EV models are expected in showrooms and on local roads by the end of 2025. And tariffs on Chinese-produced vehicles in other markets may also provide greater priority for supply for Australia. We do need more 4x4 and large SUV electric vehicles to be available in Australia to provide that choice, those options for consumers. And when we consider that some of the highest selling vehicles in Australia are big 4x4 utes, getting bigger, and SUVs. So by the end of 2025, there should be many more choices available in the Australian market. Pricing has also reduced from original entry points at around 70,000 to now just over 30,000. And next year we should have smaller, more entry-level vehicles coming in, maybe even the mid 20,000s. So very much affordable for any Australian. The increase in supply and variety of lower-priced EVs entering Australia is imperative to enable consumers to switch more easily to more affordable EV options. However, this does need to be done via responsible social and environmental supply chains. On the charging infrastructure, EV driving ranges have improved, with average ranges of now 400 kilometres and some up to and exceeding 600 kilometres, and also faster charging times. There have been continued government and private investment in charging infrastructure, and as at the 30th of June this year, we have over 1,000 public high-powered charger locations across Australia, many of which have multiple charge points. So we have improving charging infrastructure. Now we need to concentrate on consumer education and awareness of EVs. This is essential to regain consumer confidence in EVs after months of fear-mongering in the media. Some perceived barriers to entry are actually resolved, but consumers are unaware of the current state of topics such as the higher EV charging ranges, the increased charging infrastructure, and lower total costs of ownership. Sales of new petrol and diesel vehicles are decreasing. However, there are many that may not be ready at this point to transition fully to battery electric vehicles. So they may take some interim steps such as moving into petrol hybrids or plug-in electric hybrids. This is a positive trend, but we need to transition to plug-in hybrids and pure battery electric vehicles that run off an electric engine and can be plugged in and charged using renewable and lower cost off-peak energy. If we are to reach our nation's emission reduction goals, and if we are to motivate manufacturers to prioritise EV production, then we need to collaborate across the EV industry and with governments to motivate consumers and corporates to transition into EVs. So that's kind of a snapshot of what the Electrical Vehicle Council is involved in. There's quite a lot behind all of that, but I'll give you now a little update on my trip to China and what we did over there. So a couple of weeks back, I travelled with a broad range of media to BYD's manufacturing operations and headquarters in China. It was absolutely amazing to see the range of EVs on the roads. I didn't even recognise half of the brands that were out there, but it was just great to see so many of them. We first visited the BYD Blade factory in Chongqing, which was impressive in its scale, and it's got huge plans for expansion in the future. We then flew to Xi'an and visited the vehicle manufacturing plant. It was impressive there to see like robots assembling. You have all the robot arms assembling all the vehicles, doing the welding, everything else, and also transporting like engines between one production line to another. Just all very automated and robots everywhere. It was quite cool. We also got introduced to BYD's other brands, Denza, and also their Yangwang luxury brand. We were introduced to BYD Shark plug-in hybrid pickup truck, which is being launched in Australia this month in October. And we drove it. We went to an off-road driving range, which was great. It's quite full on, and you could feel the lumps and bumps on the road. But because it runs off an electric engine, it's much smoother. So you can feel the road, but it's just a much smoother ride. But this type of vehicle will really help, those 4x4 drivers really move away from petrol and diesel pickup trucks and into plug-in hybrids, and eventually pure battery electric vehicles when they become available. We also drove a luxury 4x4 from the Yangwang brand from BYD. It's called the U8, and it's a luxury EV it's absolutely next level. It's got 4 electric engines, 1 for each wheel, that allows you to move in any direction, even sideways into those sneaky little parks. You can do a full 360 or 180 if you're getting out of somewhere difficult. And it just, going on this off-road track, it just felt like you were gliding. You couldn't even feel the road. It was literally full luxury, gliding around. It was just, I could have drunken a glass of champagne while we're driving around. But it does have a price range of over 200,000. So it'll be interesting to see a new brand that is unfamiliar, and that price range. Be interesting to see what they do there. We then moved to another location for a track session around the cones. We drove the BYD Shark, the Sea Lion, and other BYDs around the track, and just really getting a feel for what the pickup truck is, the plug-in hybrid, and what the others felt like around the track there. We then went to Shenzhen, to BYD's headquarters, which is massive. It's like a suburb in itself. And we toured their innovation centre and saw all the new innovations coming to Australia in the future. And we also had a media conference with the head of BYD for Asia Pacific. So it was a great trip, very inspiring to see what the future looks like with having so many EVs on the road. So that was really, really good. So I guess to wrap things up, there are huge opportunities that lie ahead with electrification of transport, and huge benefits to our environment and to our health. Supply is catching up, costs are reducing, and infrastructure is growing. But to reach our emission targets, we really need to bring consumers on the journey via further education and by providing opportunities for more consumers to experience EVs. So thank you for listening today. And when we get to question time, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you very much.
Well done, with 7 seconds to go, Samantha.
Very good.
You avoided the buzzer. So I know there's some questions in the chat, but we'll hold on to those and come back if that's okay.
Sure.
Yes, so sorry. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Professor Anne Poelina, who's chair of the Martuwarra Fitzroy River Council. She's Professor and Chair of Indigenous Knowledges at Nulungu Institute Research, University of Notre Dame. And many of you may remember Anne's spoken to the group a couple of times. Anne has a lead role in both Indigenous and environmental matters in Northern WA and across Australia. And she's going to give us an update on some of the current areas she's working on. And she's also just returned from presenting or facilitating a panel at the Nature Positive Summit in Sydney last week. So we're looking forward to hearing your latest news, Anne. Over to you.
No, thank you for the opportunity. And, for us, it's all about story. So it's a crazy world. And I guess, one of the big things that's motivating me is how to decouple the politics of economics, because what we see is that we're failing at every level to look after our human rights, our environmental justice, and obviously multi-species justice. So it's a very interesting time. I live in the Kimberley. Beginning of the year, I was Commissioner for Water right across this country and got to talk to some very, very interesting people. For those of you that don't know, the Kimberley is quite magnificent. It's national heritage. It's the largest registered Aboriginal cultural heritage site in the world. One of the things we are just about to launch is a huge interactive map which will showcase the diversity of this place. Beautiful films, wonderful stories, amazing photography. So those of you that are members of Martuwarra Fitzroy River Council will get access to this amazing launch. And what we're showing is culture, country, and truth-telling. And so part of that is to show you the strength, the diversity, particularly the cultural diversity, but also really to bring back into some of our systems thinking this ancient Indigenous wisdom which is so relevant for modernity. So besides being at the Global Summit, there were a couple of other conversations I had in Sydney. And I think one of the things that we're saying, I am a multidisciplinary scientist, but I say sometimes that we're a little bit testosterone out on science, and we did a different way to tell the story. So I'm also a poet, a filmmaker, a storyteller, and I find that we need different ways to communicate the story of, one, what we're doing to Mother Earth, but also the opportunity for us to partner with each other and bring in our collective thinking into these systems. Because not only am I promoting the opportunity for rivers and ancestral beings to have a right to life, but also the opportunity that we have governed Australia from the beginning of time, always on scale, always from a bioregional perspective, because why? We cared about the commons for the common good of all of us. So the work that I'm doing is really at the front line of quite unjust development in the north, particularly West Australia, Northern Territory. One of the things you may not know is that West Australia and the Northern Territory do not have water markets, do not have water trading. So right now, we are giving a public interest, which is water, to the richest people on earth to profit at the demise of country and the people that live within this space. So not only am I there trying to unpack some of the cultural violence in these systems, but also finding ways where we can build bottom-up polycentric governance, finding ways to think, how do we all sit around the table and start to look at how do we govern for nature and the greater good of all of us? So it's an interesting time. The Kimberley is so beautiful. I kind of feel that Northern Australia really should be the climate chance in terms of the new economies, culture, conservation, science, regeneration. At the Global Summit Nature Positive conversation, there was a lot of really interesting international speakers, bankers, investors, and really all of them are saying the same story, which is, why do we keep having to destroy nature? What is our footprint as human beings? So as an Indigenous person, I come from a world of we and not me. So it is about the collective good of all of us. And so what we're doing in the Kimberley, particularly the Mudawara Fitzroy River, is showcasing this place as globally unique. There is not another system like it anywhere else on the planet. In May this year, the Mudawara Fitzroy River watershed was recognised as the first in the world as a living water museum. I had a call from UNESCO saying, would you like to build a museum, bricks and mortar? And I said, no, thank you. We've already got such a diverse geological system that there's so much diversity that we want the river to showcase this. So part of the work that I'm doing is very much working with Indigenous people on the ground, trying to look at how do we go back to polycentric governance? How do we go to bottom up and hear the voices of the people of country of these living water systems? So one of the things that we've been doing is really looking at where do bioregions sit within our nation? And many of you may know that we have mapped 89 bioregions in this country. And so how do we come together as human beings and sit around the table and have these conversations about how do we care for the bioregions? What could be the opportunities for the new economies that we are calling the economics of well-being? Around culture conservation, around two-way science, around biosphere, around the diversity we have. So one of the things we've done, and I can't believe it's taken almost, I'm nearly 70, I can't believe it's taken almost 70 years to work out that what we needed to do in the Kimberley with the Mudawara, the Fitzroy River, was to create walking trails. So we are building these magnificent walking trails on country, one, to create economic opportunities for Indigenous people, but that becomes a laboratory. We can see what the riparian zone is doing. We can see the movement in terms of soil and the things that are happening on country. We can see country changing right before our eyes. So these changes are happening now. So how do we balance what just development should look like? How do we work with multinational corporations and start to sort of bring in a new conversation that it can't be business as usual? So when we look at this, we need to think about, as I said, multi-species justice, that fish, the birds, the trees, the rivers, they all have a right to live and reach their full potential. How do we navigate these new economies and bring people with us, but also create ways to build capacity on country? This idea that we have is we've set up a workforce called the Mudawara River Keepers. We're training Indigenous people in two-way science. And this came about because a little while ago we heard that the trees in Africa were all imploding because the water table had shifted. And then we thought we've got the only other baobab species in the world. So with that, we've created a workforce around two-way science, Indigenous science and multidisciplinary science. And the magnificence of the Fitzroy River is being mapped out, being showcased. And as I said earlier, we are about to launch a massive amount of work, 5 years in one. Beautiful films, beautiful photography, showing the strength, the resilience, the cultural diversity, the diversity of this landscape, and why we need to think about new economies, which we call forever economies, economics of well-being. How do we look after our home in terms of that was a definition of economy. So from that, we're doing great work, really keen to share this work with all of you. I have posted my latest paper, only 6 pages, to Stephen to share with you, but this river is here, it belongs to all of us. It really is a moment in time where we need to think about doing business differently. I've gone over 7 minutes, but I want to say this is fantastic. I think it's a great opportunity for discussion. I think there's a real opportunity to start to look at if we're creating a biodiversity market around nature repair. One of the big things that came from that conference, which international investors are thinking about, is we cannot, as I said earlier, it seems a shame we have to destroy biodiversity to create a market, but we want Indigenous people to be recognised for our stewardship. And how do we walk forward with all of us and start to look at how can we heal the land? How can we regenerate country? How can we regenerate climate, heal country, and heal people? So I hope you enjoy my new paper. If you're really interested in getting online and understanding this huge amount of information we'll be sharing soon in a living water museum, please get in touch with me, and lovely to share. And I hope you've got some interesting questions. And thank you to my fellow speakers for sharing this circle of wisdom. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anne, and we'll definitely share that paper with everyone after this. And Carolyn and I were up in the Kimberley a few months ago, and we had, thanks to Anne, we did a day's sort of walk along the Fitzroy that Anne was talking about. It was absolutely fabulous. So it was very special. So thank you very much. Now I would like to introduce Kate Moonen. So Kate is the Chief Marketing, Communications and Sustainability Officer at Veolia Australia and New Zealand. So welcome to you, Kate. And Kate's going to be talking a little bit about waste and water management of the future for Australia. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you so much, Stephen and Carolyn, and everyone for having me here this evening, and so lovely to hear from the first 2 speakers. I would like to just start by paying my respects to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders, past, present and future, and acknowledge their great caring for country over many, many centuries. And I hope that we can continue to learn and take from their wisdom for our future. And I was very fascinated with everything, Professor Paulina, that you had to say. And I think in some ways we as in Veolia come from things from a slightly different angle in terms of the what we do, but certainly the same goals. So for those that don't know Veolia, we're a global company, so quite big, and we actually started in France 170 years ago. We had our birthday this year, and we started essentially in Lyon, and our whole mission was to clean up the water there. People were getting sick. The water was quite polluted, so Napoleon said, come on, form this company Générale d'Eau and help us clean the water and create public health benefits and environmental benefits from that. So that was our origins. And today our mission is still unchanged, which is to provide fair and equitable access to nature's resources and to protect and preserve and replenish those resources. And we're very lucky, I guess, 170 years down the track, that we've got the technology and the resources to be able to do a lot of that at scale. So we really try and come in and help where we think things need help in terms of, treating water, protecting biodiversity, decarbonising, recycling where we can. I did have some slides, but I'm not going to go through them all. I might show some pictures later if I get a chance. But I thought just by maybe just starting out where we're at in Australia, and we're we work across water, waste and energy, and we work with all sorts of companies from very small fish and chip shops, you know, local businesses maybe collecting their waste, right through to large multinational companies that might be in the resources sector, for instance, that are wanting to decarbonise or recover and actually improve their environmental footprint. So we have a very, very broad sort of customer base. So we engage a lot both with business, but also government on the policy side. So we do a lot of work to try and, I guess, work alongside government to help them. We've got our national waste targets, for example, we've got our decarbonisation targets, and we see it as our obligation as a large organisation with the solutions to actually come to government and help, you know, keep them aware of what solutions are available to help them reach these goals. And we do believe it is possible to reach these goals so long as we've got the right investment and the right priorities as well, which I know can sometimes be tricky when you've got smaller or shorter political cycles in the waste sector as well. Sometimes things can be very segmented by state, so we might not have a national approach to our policy around waste, for example, which can make it tricky sometimes to create consistency and get efficiency. So as a national company, we try and help bridge some of those gaps and help, you know, government understand the opportunities that might be happening in one state that might not be happening in another state. We also work a lot in different kinds of communities, including Indigenous and rural communities as well, regional communities. We think that's a really, really important part of what we do. And we work to kind of try and improve the quality of life and the quality of the natural environment for those communities where we work. So I thought today I'd just talk a little bit about, there's so much we do being across wastewater and energy, but I thought I'll just talk about a couple of things, just zoom in on a couple of things that you might find a little interesting, and then perhaps show you some photos of some things that I recently saw when I was in Hong Kong that were quite interesting. So the first thing you might not be aware is that we're actually soon, probably in around 7 years from now, going to run out of holes to put our rubbish. So our view is, look, landfilling, as we call it, or putting rubbish into holes, has had its place, and it probably will have some place into the future. But at the moment, Australia as a nation is far too reliant on landfill, and we need to start to look more towards more recovery, more recycling, and probably some other things in the mix, such as energy recovery facilities, which are another new phenomenon that have been used overseas for a long time and not really here in Australia. Unfortunately, if we look at a table, and I don't know if I can share this very quickly, but Australia is right down the bottom of our of the world's recycling, best habit recyclers. Just see if I can get this up. Not sure if you guys can see that. I might not be in slideshow mode. Has that come up for you?
Loading.
Okay, so look, what it shows is we're not great at recycling. So Europe, you know, companies like Slovenia as well as North Korea and Germany, right up the top. Australia's got a long way to go in terms of our recovery. And there's probably a few reasons for that. One of them might be, again, we've had a lot of landfill space, a lot of old mines that we could fill up with stuff. That's going to change very soon. So we need to get better at recycling. The other reason might be we don't have a lot of recycling infrastructure in Australia, which is a bit of a challenge. We need to be sort of investing in more recycling infrastructure where it makes sense, but also enabling us to send that offshore for processing where it makes sense or where it's more efficient, because we do have a relatively small population compared to, you know, a lot of other countries around the world. So sometimes it doesn't make sense to build a facility here. So it's all about, again, finding that right balance. But in essence, we need to be recovering more as a nation. So that's probably the first thing that I thought I would just mention. The next thing I thought I'd mention is that we're not really, when it comes to water, we're not really well educated about the water situation in Australia. We know we're a country of droughts and floods, and that's obviously going to increase as climate change, the effects of climate change hit us even harder. But that means we are going to need to get much smarter about not only the amount of water we use, we need to obviously reduce our consumption, but we also need to be pulling less on our natural resources, our rivers and our oceans. And to do that, we probably need to be recycling more of our water. And Australians hear the term recycled water and they get a little bit scared. They don't really know what that means. Will I be drinking water from the toilet or, someone else's old tap water? The truth is that there's amazing technology that exists today that can treat all of our water to a standard that's even cleaner than what you would see, in a beautiful untouched river or lake. So we probably need to start thinking, how can we recycle more, particularly when it comes to agriculture use and industrial use? How can we recycle more water? And how can the population perhaps become a bit more prepared to drink recycled water? The reality is we've been drinking recycled water since the beginning of time, because that's why we call it the water cycle. It's been through many, many iterations before we came, but there's technology now that can do that at scale. So how do we kind of embrace that? How do we use that again where it makes sense for us? So we have a lot of boffins in our teams that just love operating these kind of facilities and creating clean drinking water for our people, or our communities. So just, I guess, there's quite a few things we need to do. I'm not going to read through all of these because I'm conscious I've got about 45 seconds left, but quite a few things we need to do to incentivize smarter use of our resources and encourage investment for Australia in the right places so that we can use our resources in a smarter and more effective way and protect our natural environment, because it is only here for so long and we can only keep drawing on that for so long. So I guess the good news is solutions exist. Let's invest, let's get educated, and we can all move forward. We can achieve the things we want to achieve. It's just going to take a bit of education, time, and money. So I think that's my time up. But if anyone has any questions about experience overseas, happy to share.
Everyone's been so good at keeping to time. Thank you. You're, I think, finished with about 1 second to go, Kate. So very impressive. Yeah, and I think there are some questions and comments, so we can come back in a minute. But that's a perfect segue, I think, to introduce our next speaker, Shannon Mead, who's the founder of No More Butts. Shannon will be presenting about tobacco waste, the plastics treaty, and the connection to climate change and human health. Shannon, over to you.
Perfect. Hopefully you can hear me okay, and I will flash up some slides. Apologies, I've come from a corporate background and we never knew how to do anything without slides. So my apologies in advance for PowerPoint death. Can you see, should be in presentation mode now?
It's good.
All good?
All good.
Fantastic, thank you. So just wanted to firstly touch on, there's a lot of information I'll go through, but key messages being that cigarette filters, known as cigarette butts, they're a single-use plastic. Many people don't realise. Actually, there's now evidence saying there's no health benefit in that, as well as they pollute water, they create microplastics, they're problematic. And our view is actually they should be phased out or essentially be banned. We also do touch on vapes, and it's important to note that today is actually International E-Waste Day, and vapes are a big issue sort of facing the waste sector as well. But touching on No More Butts, we are Australian based, we're part of the Boomerang Alliance, and we work with organisations such as CSIRO on their marine debris research with their plastics pollution portal. And then regionally and internationally, we work with a couple of organisations linked to the SDGs, and we're an observer of the United Nations Environment Assembly. And that comes our involvement in the Plastics Treaty. Connection to SDGs, life below water is the main one that I guess we focus on, and there's specific notice in there around one of the obligations to do with tobacco, but sustainability, sustainable production and consumption is also a key one there. This is why we do what we do. Unfortunately, the images are reality. And I wanted to firstly talk about the link to climate change. Rather than going in detail, I've flashed up some QR codes of some really great resources. So, I'll be on the slide for a couple of moments if you do have the opportunity to scan them. Otherwise, I'll definitely send them through via Stephen. But this publication actually really highlights the impact of not everything from deforestation to plant tobacco, transportation, the impact to human health from planting, but actually the overall impact that it does have on us. We actually then did a perspectives issue for United Nations, and that goes through not only the climate impacts, but the triple planetary crisis around climate change, pollution, but also biodiversity loss in there as well. And that publication can be found on that QR. As I said, I'll send them all later, so or I can drop the links into the chat there. Our main focus, though, is around cigarette butts, not just in Australia, but touching on Australia for the Australian audience, about 9 billion are littered per year. We still say that number because even though smoking rates are declining or people are swapping to vaping, we actually find that population growth will actually see the net number about the same. It's anywhere from 14% up to 41% of reported litter, and it's still generally the most reported item of litter by count. Obviously, we know that they can cause harm, bushfires and so on, house fires as well. But a lot of people don't realise the amount of toxic chemicals which are in there. There's 7,000 known chemicals which are actually in every cigarette, and a lot of those are actually trapped into the filter, which then leach into the environment, also leach into landfill, into table water as well. The costs, there's an estimation from an equilibrium report compiled for WWF. It's about $73 million just the cleanup, nothing to do with the program management or the intangible impacts of biodiversity loss, tourism and so on, just the cleanup cost. And interestingly enough, the three governments, or sort of residents from three government areas actually said they'd be willing to pay more than that just to have it cleaned up for them, which is an interesting situation. So we always come back to, are they a single-use plastic? Because we're talking about harmonisation of single-use plastics. And we're talking about how do they actually link on a national level rather than state-based plans. And they absolutely are. We're saying they're problematic and unnecessary. The reason we're saying they're unnecessary, and we'll go into that in a moment, is actually the filter was introduced with some very specific reasons behind that. But it's now there's evidence that they actually don't provide any benefit to human health, whilst they actually do harm the environment. So then the Belgian Superior Health Council actually went further into that WHO study and did their own study, and they concluded from a health perspective that the proposal, the findings were actually correct. And not only is there an issue on the environment, but they actually, net do more harm than good. So that creates a really good platform to start advocating from, and that's our main focus. In the interim, things such as this plastic in filter, this is now compulsory to be on every single packet of cigarettes in Australia. We campaigned with the recent changes in legislation around packaging to actually have some rotations of environment warnings on there, but they stuck just to the 10 health warnings, unfortunately. The US has actually had some really great progress. San Francisco charged $1.25 extra per packet sold via the retailer to the consumer. So a consumer pays type solution. Beverly Hills and Manhattan actually now don't sell cigarettes. And just last week, this is groundbreaking, Santa Cruz actually announced a ban on the sale of filtered cigarettes from 2027 with a couple of caveats which should get through. So this is actually, again, a really great springboard from that platform that the WHO and United Nations set. If we look at why filters might have been introduced, and this is where you kind of start thinking, what are the commercial realities of this? When you used to have something which was full tobacco, that obviously cost a lot. So reducing that by a third to introduce a plastic cigarette filter became a lot cheaper for tobacco, provided comfort to smokers for holding, it offered convenience for disposal. They introduced menthol into those filters as well. But it came at a time where cancer alarms around cancer were being sounded. So what easier way to actually say something is better for you than to say it's filtered? And we've actually been working with Doctors for the Environment who've done some preliminary studies, which actually suggest that incidences of cancer have actually not gone down since the introduction of filtered cigarettes in Australia, which supports the exact same research from Belgium and the WHO. Alternative-wise, biodegradable would solve half the problem, but in our view, actually, there is no safer alternative. It would only solve half the problem. It would reduce the plastic, but people would still litter and they would still leach from the biodegradable filter. So it's okay, but it's not the best outcome. We believe that actually removal of filters is the best, and then things like cigarette holders, like in the old school movies, could be an option for those that didn't want to smoke, hold their filterless cigarettes. Again, why we do what we do, and more importantly, what can we do about it? So it's a really cool time at the moment because there's a lot happening in single-use plastic. We've got things like the single-use plastic bans, so we're advocating for inclusion on there. And New South Wales, which I'll talk about in a moment, has actually been the first state to look at progressing that. There's things like litter abatement fees, like the San Francisco model, which could be done at a local council level, if not at a state or federal level. And obviously, as we go down the hierarchy, the waste hierarchy, we still can clean up, and we do clean up. We can look at circular initiatives, but the best way to tackle this is actually to phase the plastic filters out. From a next steps point of view, if this is something that you, like me, become passionate about, ask your MP or the Department of Environment or Health to actually take action, and the Minister would recommend making a submission to the Way Forward consultation, which is open at the moment. The QR code is on one side. I don't know if it's on the left or the right, but that actually is the current consultation. It's open, and you'll see some dialogue from us in there proposing this, and them saying they will take action by 2027, but they need feedback into what kind of action that should be. And our initial submission is on the other side. If you want to learn more about that and in context to New South Wales, South Australia actually just introduced, and it was passed in the upper house a couple of weeks ago, private members bill to tackle cigarette waste in that state. And that's looking to go for debate in the lower house. And we would hope that would pass. But again, if anyone's in South Australia, contact the MP. That's it from a time perspective. Thank you so much. The QR code should be on the back of my head. It's also there. I will send the links and codes to all those reports that I highlighted. But yes, it's a single-use plastic. It should be phased out, and there's a connection to climate change, which is undeniable. So thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah, thanks so much, Shannon. That was really interesting, and sounds like you're getting some good wins there as well. So well done. It's excellent. Now, I'd just like to jump to the final speaker, and last but by no means least is Ray Peck. Now, Ray is from Lighter Footprints Group in Boroondara in Victoria. And Ray was referred to our group by Lisa, who's also a member of this group. Ray's going to share an overview of the Lighter Footprints Group, as well as their particular approach and successful approach to letter writing. So thank you, Ray, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Wow, I'm overwhelmed. This is a fantastic collection of speakers and so much information. Thanks for putting it together. So Lighter Footprints is a non-partisan organisation, community organisation. We don't receive donations from any political party or associated entities. Our aim is to educate and advocate and bring people together to inform them and create momentum for change and influence Australian decision makers to take the action necessary to halt global warming as a matter of urgency. We were founded in 2000 and what is it now? 2024, 18 years ago. So that's 2006 by Carolyn Ingverson, who has an OAM. She was awarded an Order of Australia for her service to conservation and the community of Boroondara. Her climate and environmental advocacy work over 20 years was fundamental to bringing together the three political parties in the federal election in Kooyong to discuss climate change. And she was instrumental in Monique Ryan's election to the federal seat of Kooyong, ousting Josh Frydenberg. So I said we were non-partisan, but now I'm talking about Monique Ryan. Well, why did some of us support Monique Ryan? Instead of volunteering for Lighter Footprints, decided to volunteer for Monique Ryan. Carolyn was one of those. It's simply because we support the candidates with the best climate policies. And in 2022, that was Monique Ryan. Now, 18 years after Carolyn founded Lighter Footprints, we have over 3,500 supporters on our mailing list. And we have multiple working groups, we call them. And each year we organise several community events. So now I'm going to try and share my screen and take you just for a quick look at our website, because that'll structure the rest of my presentation about how we work. What am I looking for? Here we go. So can you see our homepage?
Yep, that's good.
Great. So you can see there we're some grey-haired oldies. A lot of us are retired, but there are a couple of youngsters, relative youngsters in there. And this is our homepage. We talk about ourselves, and we keep some of our biggest events up there. At the moment, we're very active in the local government elections in Victoria, in Boroondara. So we develop scorecards where we send questionnaires out to all the candidates, and if they respond, we score their responses. So that's why that one's there. We had Simon Holmes a Court over here. You can see Simon is a friend of Lighter Footprints. He's also Climate 200, so we have to be a little bit careful there, because some people will say that we're just stooges for Climate 200. But he's an energy expert, and he starts off our annual events for the year in February, which is a very important one, very informative. We have a forest working group. This is our newsletter. If you'd like to find out about our events, keep up to date, if you just go to our homepage on lighterfootprints.org, you can pop your name and details in there, and then you'll just get updates for about what we're on about. We had Tim Forsey for My Electric Home speak to us this year, Professor David Lindemeyer on forests, and he launched his new book. We had, I'll go through some of the other events, but this is our homepage where we just try and promote ourselves, the sorts of things that we're on about. If I go to the Take Action page, you will see our working groups. So we have a forest working group. We take tours to the forest. We take MPs to the forest to show them the destruction in the Central Highlands. And as a result of some of that work, we put a lot of pressure on the Victorian government to stop forest logging. Electrified Boroondara, the concept originated out of Lighter Footprints, but we've distanced ourselves from it now, and it's a standalone, working to electrify, in particular, the community aspect of Boroondara and help people reduce their emissions in their homes. We have an energy transition working group. We have the letter writers working group, which is the one I manage. And we have other. Quick response group is where we might even do a demo, a local demo outside an MP's office, or we might need to quickly distribute some information to the community and that sort of thing. So again, people can volunteer here for our working groups, and then we contact them and have a chat. Our Take Action, that's our Take Action. Our What's On page highlights. Here you can see this is the Hawthorn Arts Centre. So these are our candidates forums. So we do get political in a sense, is that we invite all the candidates to talk to the community about their climate policies. And this is a federal election one. I'll show you a bit more about this one. This is the Hawthorn Arts Centre. We have 600, 700, 800 people come to these ones. We don't have any events, but we do have, at the moment, we've just about finished for the year. But our past events, this one's just been held, the Boroondara Candidates Forum. That was online. And then we broke into our 11 wards, and each of the candidates who responded talked to the questions that we'd put to them, and the participants were able to ask their own questions. That's quite a powerful event. Energy, of course. Tim Forsey, I've mentioned. Richard Dennis, we get some big name people from the Australia Institute, spoke to us. That was a really good event. David Lindemeyer mentioned on the forest wars. Simon Holmes a Court. So that's our events page, and these are all recorded, and so you could, if you're interested in any of those, you could watch them. So if I go to our blog page, we have a lot of information here that's relevant to the Boroondara community, but also more widely. And if I search down here, it's a searchable. If I go to federal election, you can see here the candidates forum that we had at the last federal election. And I just want to scan down this one. I just want to show you the empty chair. So the only candidate who refused to come to the candidates forum for Kooyong, if I scroll in on that, you'll see is Josh Frydenberg. Now, that was the most photographed chair in the nation at that time. We had TV cameras there, and they all focused on that chair. Josh Frydenberg held his own event with his supporters a few doors down in the Glenferrie Hotel on the same night. That wasn't well received by the community, and part of the reason, I think, why Monique Ryan was elected. As I said before, we send out questionnaires to the candidates for our elections. They've responded to those questions, and then we score their responses, and we develop these things called scorecards. So you can see this is a strong candidate. This candidate refused, or not refused, yes, failed to respond. So about half of our candidates respond to the questionnaires, and about half of them don't. They get a range of different scorings. So then we print these scorecards off, and we deliver them to every household in Boroondara, which is about 80,000 households. So a lot of work and time goes into these scorecards. We have a newsletter, which I've mentioned. We have a letter writing group, which I've been asked to talk about. I think my time's nearly up. I'm so sorry. What should I do, Stephen?
There's the buzzer.
On time there, Ray.
Okay, thank you so much. Gosh, I think you're obviously doing so much with Lighter Footprints. It's great to get the overview, so thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
It's terrific. Yeah, really appreciate it. So what we thought we'd do, we've got about 20 more minutes, so we'll have just probably 3 or 4 minutes for questions for each of the speakers, depending on, some speakers maybe have more questions than others. But Samantha, there's a couple in here for you, so we might just round back to you, and if everyone can use their mind, be flexible and get back around to EVs. So the question, is there a risk that the Chinese EVs might be bad for security reasons? How is progress with V2L, V2H and V2G, and what's your expectation with that? And what's the take-up of EVs like in China?
Just before you jump in, Samantha, Ray, do you mind just stopping sharing your screen? We'll just get back to the group. Thank you.
I thought I had, sorry. Stop sharing. There we go.
Quite lovely.
Terribly sorry.
That's okay.
And Ray, just to let you know, I took part in a parliamentary Friends of EVs, showcasing EVs and plug-in hybrids last week in Parliament House. And Monique Ryan is one of those Friends of EVs, and she was there supporting the day, so which is really good to see. So, okay, Chinese EVs, there's been a lot of contention in the media about data and security and all sorts of things. Really, I mean, if you think about all of our smartphones and, you know, smart home devices that we have, and, you know, these connectivity and infotainment systems are available not just in electric vehicles, but also in petrol and diesel vehicles now. So it's not an electric vehicle issue. It's a, you know, where do these sort of cars come from? Really, Australia has laws in place that aim to, you know, protect consumers, and that's what really governs what vehicles are able to import into Australia. And there's communication guidelines there and requirements. But really, it's down to the individual brands as to, you know, what is in their vehicles, what do they collect data for. So some brands will collect it for marketing purposes and will sell off that that information. Others will only use it for aggregating data for the performance of the vehicle. So different brands do different things. And if you have an infotainment system with, say, Google or Spotify or anything like that, you sign up to the terms and conditions within those apps, and that's what they're allowed to collect data as per what you agree to and what you sign in for. So, but I don't think there's anything at the moment saying that the Australian government is going to ban EVs because of security risks. I think there would have to actually be a security risk, whereas at the moment it's rumour, it's individual brands being asked questions, but there's nothing at the moment to say that there are security risks. On the vehicle to load, vehicle to home, and vehicle to grid. So vehicle to load, that's where your vehicle will actually charge, you know, your power tools, or if you're camping, it might power your rescue or whatever else. The cars are actually in market now that can do that. And we just saw last week, you know, the incoming Ford Ranger, and also you've got the Shark, the BYD Shark. They all have vehicle to load where you can plug into the socket and you can charge your power tools out when you're out on the road. So that's really good. Vehicle to grid and vehicle to home. So that's that's going to be very strong. What can I say? It's going to be probably 80% of the storage for energy in the future will be with your car. So at the moment, there are vehicles in Australia that have vehicle to grid and vehicle to home capabilities, but you do also need a bidirectional charger. So they probably at the moment cost about $10,000. We really want to see those costs get down to sort of half that, if not more. We have actually been requesting governments leading into upcoming elections to subsidise these bidirectional chargers to make it, you know, less expensive for people to get into an EV, but also have that ability to charge back to their home or to the grid. So ultimately, vehicle to grid and vehicle to home will reduce energy costs because you'll charge during the daytime, which will be renewable energy, or off-peak times at the middle of the day or the middle of the night. And then you can charge your anything that you need. You can charge your car during those non-peak times, but then during peak times, you can actually then put that back into your house or back into the grid. So it really will reduce costs over time for energy because the big energy providers won't have to put a lot of money into new assets to increase capacity of the grid because it's going to be in these cars. So it's a very good thing. We fully support V2G and V2H and V2L, and it's all coming. Third question about EV uptake in China. I think Australia is probably shy of 10%, but not good enough. We need to do a lot more. We need to grow about 40% year on year to get to what our targets are. So we've got a lot to do. The EU is probably averaging somewhere around 14%, but then you have Norway, which is up around 80% or north of that. So that's really encouraging. Norway's been doing it for a long decade, so they've been making a lot of headway. And China is probably about 31%. So as I said, you can just see EVs everywhere on the road. And I think that's just going to get higher and higher because they've got so much being invested by the government in manufacturing and innovation and electric vehicles. So really looking forward to seeing that increase. And we openly, we encourage the Chinese supply of vehicles and EVs into Australia because it'll lower the costs and it'll also just provide greater variety for everyone.
Lots, Samantha. That's great. Rattle through those questions. Yeah. Anne, I'll just bring you in here. There's a question for you from Jacinta. She says, I heard from some of the attendees at the Nature Positive Summit last week that there was a big focus on Indigenous people solutions knowledge. As a First Nations leader, did you feel that focus and inclusivity as well?
Yeah, I think everyone got the message that it can't be business without us. But the reality is we've been custodians of this country from the beginning of time. So we've got, a little bit up there. I shared the platform with the chief scientist to talk about two-way science, Indigenous science and wisdom, sitting side by side with multidisciplinary. So it's really an opportunity to start to look at this. I think one of the big issues is that a lot of this market is around private land. And I think one of the things we need to look at is, in a way, one of the things that a lot of Indigenous people say is, how can we start to create a sovereign wealth from this? So maybe projects that are starting on country should consider how can they ensure that some of the profit that's generated is worked in hand with Indigenous people. The Biodiversity Council in New South Wales has got excellent models of how this is already working on the ground in partnership with Indigenous people. So it's a case of being brave, reaching out and looking at how do we all share the wealth creation that could come from something that has been so destructive. But the point we're making as Indigenous leaders is that it needs to be about regeneration, not extraction, and healing land, healing people, healing climate. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne.
Oh, so much there, Anne. Thank you. So, Kate, does the solid waste recycling include incineration? Just take yourself off mute.
Sorry, I forgot I was on mute there. No, it doesn't. So on the chart that I showed you, the data is actually referencing waste that had actually been diverted either from landfill or incineration. So waste that goes to some sort of recycling or reprocessing facility so it can be turned back into a usable form. And what's interesting is that incineration, I guess, as a form of treatment's been around for quite a while in some parts of the world. So in Germany, it's been around since about 1920. And you'll recall there at the top of the recycling chart. So what we've seen is, even though that technology has been introduced and it's far improved from what it was, nearly 100 years ago now, they're highly technological facilities that, highly engineered and very safe and very environmentally secure. But what we have seen is that some of them are now going offline in Europe, either because they're old, they're coming to end of life, or because the stock feed that has been feeding them is reduced because the recycling rates have improved in those nations. So I think that's a really positive thing, that hopefully, you don't need too many of these things, and that over time, as you get better at educating and build the right recycling infrastructure, the demand for those is minimal. But yes, that figure did not include incineration in the one I showed you.
Great. Thanks so much, Kate. That's interesting. Shannon, just bring you in here. So the question here is, do you think that vapes are becoming a bigger issue than cigarette butts now, given the harmful battery issues and litter issues that they now pose?
Yeah, and you asked that just before we started as well, so I'm glad to see someone else ask that. And as said, today being International E-Waste Day, it's quite a timely note. I think the prevalence is less, but the ability to cause damage is far greater. And we're seeing several hundred fires in trucks, bins and facilities, which are caused by embedded batteries, lithium-ion batteries, And in many cases, obviously it's not all, it's vapes. And that's because there's no disposal scheme for vapes. So vapes were allowed through the side door. Wherever you sit on, you know, the nicotine versus non-nicotine and versus smoking and so on, reality is that that product came in without a way to dispose of it. And so there is still no coordinated national scheme to dispose of them. There's trials 2 or 3 years after they've come in. There's now trials of 21 sites in New South Wales, but we need a regulated scheme. We need funding either into B-Cycle as a voluntary scheme, or we need mandatory funding. So yes, they can cause a lot of damage. People are actually swapping, but they're also augmenting. So they're smoking and vaping, or they're now actually starting to smoke because they have vaped and there is the nicotine hit there. So cigarette butts won't be going away anytime soon, unless obviously we can do something about it. But yes, vaping has the ability to cause instant damage as an ignition source in waste.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for covering that, Shannon. Ray, now might be a good time to just ask you to speak for 1 or 2 minutes about the letter writing angle of lighter footprints. Just take yourself off mute and just for
Sure. Yeah, okay. We have about 50 letter writers in lighter footprints. There's another group called Paper Pixies, which is also a national letter writing group. We operate by email, so we have about 6 people who get up early each morning and monitor the main papers in Melbourne, including the Australian and the Australian Financial Review. They select articles which have climate focus and they share them with the 50 people. And then those 50 people decide which articles they'd like to respond to, send their letter off, because it has to be a quick turnaround so that it's topical in the news cycle. Paper Pixies, they work by on Facebook, and they're very successful. So they publish about 100 letters a month, and we publish about 150 letters a month. So last year we had 2,800 letters published around the country in all jurisdictions, nationally and state as well. The thing that's enabled us to publish that many numbers is because we run workshops about letter writing. We have tips for new writers. We don't just leave people to their own devices. It's an art form. Anyone can write a letter, but not everyone can get them published. So we work really, really, really hard at getting our letters published and refined. That's why we're so successful. But in addition to that, we use something called Newsbank, which is a database. So each day, most Australian newspapers are uploaded into the database and it's searchable. So for example, if I was to show you my email inbox, you would see a lot of emails which have come into me during the day with my alerts that I've set up for climate change or Barnaby Joyce or whoever I'm interested to follow. And then I open that email up and there's the article in Newsbank, and I can decide whether or not I want to respond to it. Sometimes that same article is in multiple papers. So if I write a letter, if I spend half an hour writing a letter, I can send that off to 6 different newspapers and increasing my chance of publication. So we have quite sophisticated ways of getting published. We work closely with the Climate Action Network. We meet regularly with CANA, and they give us messaging so that we're all on the same page with the climate movement. Okay, we're not just riding our own particular bandwagons, but we're using our collective resources to have maximum effect. That's enough from me.
Thanks.
No, I welcome anyone here. If you like writing and you like to counter misinformation and disinformation in the Australian media, in particular the Murdoch press, the Australian Herald Sun, Daily Telegraph, those sorts of papers, please contact me and we can have a chat offline. And if you want to have a try, we can send you some tips and set up a Zoom workshop and that sort of thing for you.
That's fantastic, Ray. That's really, really impressive. Thank you. And I might just bring you back in for a final comment or two, just on the recent Nature Positive Summit. It'd be great just to get any thoughts you had about it, any, what you thought was particularly good maybe, or just, anything that stood out to you.
Yeah, I think one of the things I said in some closing remarks is that I think we're all on learners. this is a new market, you know, there's already parameters in there, but I think one of the things is really to think about how does Indigenous people come into this. I could be quite sceptical and say I think this is the last theft of our property rights, but I see there is a great opportunity here in terms of how do we work at the local level and build these economies, particularly around what I'm calling the forever industries, that these industries can be, you know, self-perpetuating and go forever without the conversation of extraction. But I think the big message is coming from international people is that we need to be building good governance for nature and really understand that there is still an opportunity cost in this country, particularly working with Indigenous people, that we can go into this thinking that we can have equity for all. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. I mean, I've happened to be part of a number of conversations about ACUS recently, and the nature traded equivalent, but I can't remember the acronym, and so the carbon credits and nature credits, and it does seem like, you know, it's a great idea. Like everything, it's open. It's up to people to be honest and fair about it versus just another way to make a buck or you know, get away with something. So it's great to hear your perspective as well on that. So thank you. Thank you so much to all our speakers. Wow, I feel like I've had a wonderful shot in the arm of energy and information, and so interesting to hear from all of you. So and all, yeah, complimentary but different. So thank you so much, and I'm so impressed you all kept time too. So that made our job very easy. So yes, thanks very much, and we will circulate some notes as well afterwards. We hope you've enjoyed the session this evening. So thank you to all the speakers. We're really grateful also for the work that you all do. It's also important, and please keep it up. Next month, we're hoping to have a speaker from the Australia Institute. We're just teeing that up. And then December is going to have a health focus. We've got the CEO from CAHA, the Climate and Health Alliance, coming in, hopefully another complimentary speaker as well. So we've got a couple of great sessions for the last part of the year. Keep spreading the word about our group. Everyone's welcome. Thank you to everyone. Great to see so many people here this evening, and we'll let you carry on with your evening.